Are you an adult survivor of childhood sexual abuse and find yourself negotiating sex in your head with your partner that, for all intents and purposes, you love and you trust? My name is Betsy Perez, and I too experienced childhood sexual abuse, and I spent most of my 20s, if not all of my 20s, healing my sex life and also using reparenting as a tool to do so. And one of the things that I experienced often was disconnecting from my sexual experiences with my partner. And I found myself also negotiating in my head before, during, and even after how I was going to experience one, go into it, two, how I was gonna endure it, and three, how I was going to pretend afterwards that I enjoyed it or that it was everything that my boyfriend at the time would want it to be. And I struggled with sex and I struggled with wanting to be present and wanting to speak up for myself and wanting to let my lover in to the struggle and the suffering that I was experiencing while we were sexually intimate, at least the times that we were sexually intimate, because the fact of the matter is that, right, your sexual life isn't always this. It comes in waves. But when I started to intentionally heal from my childhood sexual abuse, you can't get away from the sexual healing part, which is the layer of the sexual abuse that oftentimes gets left out of the conversations for adults. And we are, many of us, left to figure it out for ourselves, find ourselves in possibly the BDSM, sex positive kink community, which is a beautiful community in and of itself within the context of what you're looking for and what you need. But oftentimes I find that as an adult who experienced child sexual abuse and other individuals, that many of us end up on that end of things because of a lot of the parameters that are set around kink and the the BDSM and the fetish community, and those guardrails that they have around consent, even though you can have many conversations also around the violations around consent in the sex positive kink fetish community, the alternative sex community. Even still, inherent to those lifestyles are these very explicit components of consent that I know that for me helped immensely. But back to, because I went on a bit of a tangent, but back to negotiating with myself, and possibly what you're finding is that you are in your mind navigating like, okay, they're gonna want me to do X, Y, and Z, or fuck, they're gonna kiss me here, or I'm not feeling it. And you swallow and you feel the discomfort of what it means to lay there again, you know? And it was a time where it was happening often enough for me that eventually I mustered up the courage to say something to my partner. Now, what I realized after years of working on myself and my own healing, my sexual healing journey, which is very specific, because we can have our emotional and our mental health healing journeys and our spiritual healing journeys from childhood sexual abuse, but our sexual healing journeys from childhood sexual abuse is, I believe, at the core, and one of the most holistic and universal ways to really heal from it, because we forget about our bodies. The childhood sexual abuse for most of us happens physically to the body. Whether, even if you were a child that may not have been had physically experienced a violation, in the sense that the body came into contact with another person, with an adult or a significantly older child, but just visually maybe seeing some pornographic images, being exposed to sexual images that were beyond your developmental capacity or your cognitive capacity, that in and of itself can be internalized and is a physical injury. When you think about the senses and you see things and you process things, those are physical experiences that can really impact and traumatize an individual, depending on the severity and of course, other factors. Nevertheless, most commonly, we experience childhood sexual abuse through the body. The body gets touched, the physical barrier of the body gets impacted, it gets violated. So when we don't take the time to give the body the sexual component, the pleasure, the intimacy, when we do not give it its proper place in our healing and wellness journeys, then it can really cause havoc with ourselves primarily, and then outwardly with the world that we interact with. And that in that world is our lovers, is our partners, is our family, is our friends, and our communities, and so on and so forth. That's why I have always said that childhood sexual abuse is just not an individual trauma and injury and harm. It's a familial harm, it's a communal harm, it's a global harm, because eventually we grow up to be these adults that we are, and then we go out into the world and we interact with them based on our foundational experiences, and obviously, and then some. But we can't escape that many adults who have experienced childhood sexual abuse have felt the ripple effect of this particular harm in our lives, and very poignantly in our sex lives. And we live in a culture that doesn't highlight the pervasiveness of the long-term impacts of sexual abuse on adults when it happens in your childhood. So one of the things that I realized is that when I was negotiating with myself, one, not allowing my partner in the conversation, right? Because we shrink, we stay in ourselves, we stay in our mind, we replicate our response to feeling discomfort, feeling a sense of unsafety, and possibly even reverting back to the violation. Many of us still have flashbacks and things of that nature, and that's another video for another topic. Please let me know if you'd like to hear a little bit more about that, on some of the ways that the disconnect comes up for us, how it's come up for me and individuals that I have spoken with and have worked with. So one of the number one things that we have underdeveloped is our self-advocacy skills. Sexual healing, if we allow ourselves, it is a skill building opportunity. We were not at fault for the sexual abuse that we experienced in our childhood. However, we are 100% responsible for the ramifications, the impacts that it has in our adulthood. We are responsible for the ways that it's hurting us, and we're also responsible for the ways that that harm has also inspired growth inspired purpose as well, because childhood sexual abuse, and I want to really imprint this on as many adults who have experienced childhood sexual abuse, is that this is an opportunity in our adult lives to recommit ourselves to a much more present, pleasurable, intimate way of living. We get a chance to learn how to live again in a much more present, beautiful way. It's one of the things that I was so surprised about when I decided to wholeheartedly and fully allow my life to essentially fall apart so I can rebuild it again, and I can rebuild it with presence, with pleasure, with intimacy, with intention, with morality, with that, all of the things that I felt that I was void of. I allowed myself to wholeheartedly rebuild. And you can't do that without skills. And sexual healing and getting support in your sexual healing is about skill building. And when you find yourself negotiating in your sex life with your partner, chances are that your self your self advocacy skills are underdeveloped. When we experience childhood sexual abuse, the way that oftentimes we deal with it is by the way that we saw others deal with it. So we were not if we found that we were not advocated for, if we weren't encouraged to advocate for ourselves, and I'll even put this pin here, there are many of us that experience childhood sexual abuse, and we can advocate for ourselves outside of the bedroom, very much so. If anything, there's probably many of us that, we are the first one to speak up for ourselves. But for some reason, our sexual self-advocacy begins to shrink, and it's underdeveloped. And that is not a coincidence, and that is not your fault. If you came up with having such a traumatic, such a harmful, and imprinting experience on your sex, on your autonomy, then of course, as you get older and you didn't speak up, you are a child, you shrink, you don't say nothing. The first thing that goes oftentimes is our voice. We feel ourselves crawling out of our bodies because we want to say something and we want to do something, and we told somebody, but then they told us that it's not real, or that it wasn't that bad, and just forget about it. And the encouragement to advocate for ourselves, oftentimes, especially me, I'm a Dominican woman, Dominican culture, you're not incentivized, you're not encouraged to speak up for yourself, especially as children. So it's no coincidence that your sexual self-advocacy is underdeveloped. And part of that, part of rebuilding, your sexual self-advocacy is self-awareness. And if you're here and if you are just kind of ruminating through the internet about how do I reconnect with my partner and things like that, the thing is that when we're talking about self-advocacy, especially sexual self-advocacy in the bedroom, that starts with self-awareness that something is maybe askew, something doesn't feel right, and being able to tune in to that stimulus. Two, being able to understand what that stimulus is for you. Introception, which is is a term that being able to make sense of what's happening internally in the body. So your awareness, your introception of being able to communicate. So then your awareness, something's happening, I feel it. Two, being able to sit with yourself and what's happening, and communicate it to yourself, understand and comprehend for yourself, or at the very least, be willing to ask yourself the question of what's going on. Okay, something's going on. What's going on? And then being able to communicate to another person, i.e., your lover, your partner, whoever it is that you find yourself intimately engaged with, sexually intimately engaged with. Uh, you want to develop these skills, because this is not just skills for the bedroom. This is skills for life, but especially for us who no one taught us and no one told us that. I know for me, no one told me that. Even when therapy, I went to therapy as a teenager. I was in foster care growing up in my teenagehood. So I was around. I had the mental health services. I've had a long history with mental health services in my childhood, and people knew. They were aware that I have a history of childhood sexual abuse and the trauma, but no one tells you, when you're 13, 15, when you're 10, 11 years old, no one tells you, when you're 23 years old, when you're 33, when you're 63, this may come up in this way. So it's okay if now you find yourself having a difficult time speaking with your partner, advocating for yourself, and just negotiating internally. And my encouragement is that you start noticing, reflecting, take a timer, 10 minutes, so you can just reflect. Take a time when you have a little bit of space. You'll maybe have 30 minutes where you can kind of write for 10 minutes, take another 20 just to chill, and then that no one is gonna bother you. Your lover is not gonna come, and then you have to immediately adjust. Give yourself 30 minutes, and know that in those 30 minutes, you're gonna take 5 to 10 to just be reflective of maybe the last time that you and your partner were intimate, or you were intimate with someone and you noticed that you didn't want to continue, or you didn't want to do a certain sexual act, or you wanted to initiate and you felt awkward or intimidated, or what was the moment? What was the moment where you wanted to speak up and you didn't? What was that sensation in your body? Can you remember the moment, right? That awareness, oh, something's happening. Then what was the moment? What was the feeling in your body? What did you feel? What were your thoughts? Did you feel yourself tense up? And did you understand that, oh, I want to stop this, or I want to try something different, or I want to try something new? And then the third one, because the assumption is you probably didn't tell your partner that you were having some struggles and some issues in that sexual encounter. So why didn't you express to your partner your particular desire, need in that moment? What held you back? In the moment, if you could have done something different, what would you have done? What would you need? Maybe if something like this came up again, what would you need from in that moment? And also consider what would you need to support you to have a conversation with your partner about your wants and your needs. And it may not necessarily be like, well, the last time that we were intimate, because believe me, you've been there. And that's, and even that kind of a conversation is very delicate in and of itself. But considering in a moving forward way, after you've done your reflections, I think there's some things that we're going to reflect on our own that may not have to be privy to our partners, and then you come with a bit of a game plan. Like, this is the conversation that I want to have, and these are the so it allows for for us to come with a bit more perspective and a little bit more space, because sometimes I found for myself, when I try to have the conversation immediately, I didn't have enough perspective. I was just purging, and I didn't have enough perspective in order to have a fruitful conversation where my partner hears me and understands me, and I hear them and understand them, and we can co-create a reality for ourselves. So I know I said a lot, but just to recap, as adults who experience childhood sexual abuse, no one told us, many of us, no one told us that we were going to have to develop our sexual self advocacy skills, even with the people that we love and feel the most safest with, and that we want to be the most intimate and share our most vulnerable parts of ourselves with intimately, sexually, and have that pleasure with them. So that's not your fault. However, it is your responsibility if you want to have a better sex life, if you want to be an educated adult who can support themselves sexually, who's a sexually educated adult in your own life, then that's your responsibility. That's our responsibility. Developing your sexual self advocacy, your sexual self advocacy skill is important, and the ways that we develop our self advocacy is by developing our practice of listening to ourselves, our introspection. So, awareness to the stimulus, something is happening. Sitting with yourself and tuning into yourself and listening into yourself. What am I sensing? What is happening? Why is it, possibly why is it happening? And communicating and comprehending with yourself. And then internally and then externally being able to communicate that outward to the person or persons that you are intimately with. So if you find that this is something that you'd want some extra support with, and how to develop that skill for yourself, how to begin that sexual healing journey if you haven't started, or if you're in the middle of it, if you are wanting to explore a new layer of it, I support adults who experience, I support adults like ourselves who experience child sexual abuse and want to improve they want to improve their sex lives, and they just want some support from someone else who's also had a similar experience as them. If this is you and you want a little bit more support, then please go to the link in my bio, get yourself on a call with me, and we'll see if we're a good fit to work together. Once again, my name is Betsy Perez, and I'm sending you so much love on this beautiful day, and hugs and kisses. Mwah.